All right, so welcome everybody. Real quick, my name's Randy Crum. So I'm the host tonight. I run the data visualization meetup groups in Dallas Fort Worth, in Austin, and in Silicon Valley. And I'm also the organizer of what we're calling these global DataViz events that are shared with 22 DataViz meetup groups across the US and Europe. We're still trying to get more. We keep getting more groups to join us. I run my own data visualization company called InfoNewt, and we do data visualization design for clients all over the world. I wrote the book called Cool Infographics, and I run the website called Cool Infographics. And I also I developed and teach the data visualization and storytelling certificate program, which is an online course at SMU. And I'll mention that in a minute. But just first, a quick intro. If you came on early, you saw this map animating when you joined. So we have 22 independent DataViz meetup groups. As you know, most DataViz meetup groups are just run by volunteers. But these 22 groups so far have helped us publicize and promote online events. And since the pandemic started, there's no reason, since we're going to be on Zoom anywhere, that people can join from all over. And so all of you can join and see the event tonight. So if any of you know of an organizer or a group that isn't on this list, please, if you can, make an introduction. I'm always trying to reach out to new DataViz meetup groups. As well as if any of the organizers from these meetup groups are on tonight. I think I saw a couple of them in the participant list. Feel free to, if you've got any other events coming up, go ahead and post those in the chat. I didn't get anything from anybody to announce officially, but if you've got something you want to share about your group, you're welcome to share that in the chat. For anybody that uses Slack, I've been running this data community Slack in the DFW area, but it's open to anybody. Anybody can join the Slack, and it's not specifically just data visualization. It's basically a broader data community. And so it's open if anybody wants to join and be a part of that. The way to join a Slack group, especially one of these, this is a free Slack group that we set up, is to use this link. So this dfwdataviz.com/Slack will let you in and let you create a login to the group. One of the best things about in-person events for Meetup is the ability for employment, whether you are posting a job for your company and you're trying to reach people and you have that opportunity to network, or you're looking for a job and you're looking for your next opportunity in the data visualization world. And those live in-person meetups gives you the chance to network and meet people who may be hiring. So because we're online, it becomes a little more difficult. If anybody has an open position, you are welcome to post that and post a link to it in the chat. But your best bet is going to be to use your local meetup group. So on Meetup, every city, every chapter of Meetup, at the bottom of that Meetup page, there is a discussion board. And you will reach all the members of that Meetup group, not just the ones that are here tonight at the live event. So that's a great way to advertise your positions and use those local Meetup groups as much as you can. Alternatively, I'll just mention I do run a jobs board on the Cool Infographics website. So if you have an open position, you are welcome to send it to me. They're free for me just to add to the list. And I'm happy to do that. You can do that through the page. There's a button there to submit a job if you have one. And so I'm happy to post any of there. And if you're looking for a job, you can always look there and see what the most recent job postings I've been able to find are on the jobs board. Last thing I want to do is thank our sponsor tonight. Our sponsor tonight is Food Truck AI, which is a project developed by the Salt.io group. And what they are looking for on Food Truck is charts and data visualizations that they can syndicate. So the idea is it's similar to stock photography, where a designer like all of you, this audience is probably more interested in designing the data visualizations than using the ones that are already on the site. But the idea is that you as a designer would create a data visualization, you would then post it and make it available on Food Truck, and then other websites could use your data visualization on their website and give you back credit for that design. It's sort of like a syndicated way to publish data visualizations. So that's what Food Truck's all about, and we thank them for helping us cover the webinar costs through Zoom. All right, so Lee, let me bring you on. I want to introduce everybody to my friend Lee Feinberg. He's going to speak
Hey there.
tonight. I'm going to stop sharing here and make sure that you can share. So Lee is the founder of DecisionViz and one of the Tableau partners. Um, and you've got more that you want to explain. So I know you're going to do your own intro. All right. So Lee, welcome.
Awesome. Yeah, it's good to see you, Randy. Hopefully, we'll see each other in person for real sometime soon. It's been a few
Yeah,
years.
exactly. You're up in New York, right?
I am in central New Jersey, at about
Oh,
25 miles from New York. And actually,
so from
yesterday,
Texas, it's all up there.
yeah, I know, us
Yeah.
Yankees, right? Yesterday was my second time back in New York City since 2.5 years ago.
Wow.
So it's yeah, quite an experience to get back in, but it was good. Got to
Okay.
break
I'm
out
going
of
to
New
stop
Jersey.
my video and let you kick off because I can see your screen.
Cool. Excellent. So yeah, so it's good to be here. I'm glad that we were able to coordinate it. And hello to my fellow New Jerseyans. I saw a few folks chatting in from there, and Pittsburgh. My son just graduated from Pitt, so it's good to see some folks from there. By the way, if you hear any loud sounds, it's hopefully only the storm that's supposed to come through here soon. So I'm looking forward to getting some rain. We haven't had much like most places up here. So let's jump in. So I told you a little bit about my son, but here I am down here and want to share something that I'm really proud of. And my daughter is still in college. She's at James Madison University. And about a year ago, I volunteered to help them overhaul their COVID dashboard. And what happened was I went on, like all parents, to see what was going on, and I immediately knew that it was prepared in Tableau. So I was kind of bracing myself to see what was going to happen when it came up on the screen. And sure enough, they definitely needed my help. But the real reason I'm bringing that up is they had a lot of data, but they didn't really think about the message that they wanted to communicate. They really just had so much information. They just threw it up on all these very complex charts, and it was a long dashboard. And even as someone who works with data all the time, it was kind of hard for me to figure out what was important on there and what they were really trying to do, because each school really had their own message that they were trying to get at about what was happening on campus and so forth. And that's really what I want to talk about today, is that idea of communication and getting your message across easily. So as Randy introduced me, I'm Lee Feinberg. I'm the president and chief data officer of DecisionViz. And our focus as a management consulting company is to help our clients build what we call an army of trustworthy decision makers. And we do that by helping them scale their data literacy and data storytelling in the company. So before we get started, I'd love to have everybody just put their favorite chart type in the chat. Just curious to see what we've got going on here. And while that's going on, I also want to encourage, as Randy did, please put your questions in the chat. Don't wait till the end, because Randy and his team will be monitoring that. And if they see something come up, they'll stop me and throw that question out to me. Really want to be able to answer it as close to the moment as possibly can. All right, I'm just taking a look here. Two of my favorites, stacked and donut charts. Sunburst was found. Sankey. Violin, bee swarm. Wow, we've got a variety of answers here. Well, I'm going to admit that as far as I'm kind of concerned, it was a bit of a trick question, because I know everybody has something that they're kind of either enamored with, or maybe even their organization really likes to see, and it becomes a standard of what they use. But really what I want you to think about is that the best chart is always the one that communicates your message in the best and easiest way. So whether you like bar charts, pie charts, Sankey's, whatever it is, I really want to make sure that you keep your mind open when you're doing your work to really think about it in that way. Just like when you're writing with words, you always want to choose the best words to get your message across. You don't necessarily have favorite words. And even if you do, you probably don't use them all the time. You're probably trying to change them up using the thesaurus, using an AI writer to come up with some different way of saying that. So it's the same in our world when we're writing visually. You want to be able to think about it that way. Now, if there's one thing that I love in the world, not nearly as much as my family and my daughter down school, it's Tableau. And I'm just going to tell you a few things about my life with Tableau because it is a big part of it. But I also want you to know that this is not a talk about Tableau. Everything we're going to cover today, you can use with whatever software you have. Just think about it again, like when you're writing, how you write the same way, whether you use a word processor or a pen and pencil or a marker. So it's the same principle here. And I've had a lot of amazing moments with Tableau. I've been very fortunate. I started DecisionViz a decade ago and was one of the early Tableau partners. So it just passed 10 years doing that. And I also was like Randy and all the folks who are running the meetups. I really appreciate the work that you do to run your group because I ran 2 Tableau user groups. I ran one in New Jersey and one in New York for 8.5 years. And I've done a lot of pro bono work with some great organizations, but my most memorable one was working with the Tableau Foundation, and they flew me to Rome for a week to work with the World Food Program. So I love that one. And in 2021, I became an adjunct faculty at NYU teaching a course called Visual Analytics with Tableau. So that's enough about Tableau. Because I'm sure that you know that to be successful with data visualization requires being more than good at the software itself. You also have to have a level of data literacy. And that's really what I focus on with my clients and when I run workshops with them, is teaching them the methodologies and the concepts that I've developed so they can apply them into their work. And again, that's kind of what we're going to cover today. This should hopefully be some practical ideas that you can take away and use. So I'm going to cover 3 ideas today. And I think you are going to see visualization in a new light that goes beyond just the idea of building dashboards. And whether you're an advanced designer or you're just starting out, I think it's going to save you a lot of time and, more importantly, make your work have a lot more impact. I'm even going to go as far to say that I think this may upend the way you think about data visualization, which I know sounds a bit dramatic, but I've really seen it happen with my clients and their companies. And more importantly, it helps in their careers. So let's take a look at these 3. So first, you're not in charge when it comes to analyzing visuals. Now, why that's not exactly true. What's important is that each of your visuals sends a clear and direct message into the reader's brain. Number 2 is color has the ability to clarify, but it also has the ability to confuse. So we'll look at a couple of case studies and transform the poor use of color on those dashboards into a way that color actually delivers a clear message. And last is that the goal of creating dashboards is to help conduct an analysis and answer questions, yet most dashboards are actually set up in a way that goes directly against how the audience is prepared to consume the information. So we're going to get into that. I know that one sounds a little bit strange, but you'll see what I mean. Now, I don't really mean to sound negative with all these, because in fact, I'm going to show you some very simple steps to make sure you can avoid these missteps and have that greater impact. So I'm sure many of you have heard ideas like this, that we have the ability to recognize very complex patterns in the blink of an eye. Now, here's something you may not have heard before, and I think maybe it's going to blow your mind. Our brains are working on images as soon as we see them. So in a way, we're thinking about what it means before using effort to think about it. So what does this mean? When you show images in a way that incorrectly communicates the message or it's confusing, it's going to slow your reader down. And the longer it takes them to decipher the meaning, they're probably going to be more inclined to ignore it and maybe just move on to the next thing, which is, of course, exactly what we don't want them to do. So what are these patterns that I'm talking about? Well, two of the most common patterns in data visualizations are gradients and hue. And maybe you didn't think about them as patterns until now, but I want you to start thinking about them that way. And when I say color, I'm really talking about two things. So one is gradient, and that represents different, use that to represent values that either have different shades of a single color or shades possibly of multiple colors. And the other one is hue, which means unique single colors, which represents the value of a dimension or a description of information or labels of information. And I'm focusing on these two because I really think they're the most commonly used patterns, and unfortunately, they're also the most abused patterns. And here's what I mean by significant abuse. That people use too many gradients or hues, so really nothing stands out, and then it's hard to know what's important. We really want to use color to make the important information stand out. I also see where they use the same gradient or hue to represent more than one thing. So here, that causes real confusion to the reader because it's messing with their brain. They think the colors are related when they're not, because that's how the brain behaves. It sees two colors that are the same, says, oh, they must be related. The third is using color when it's not needed. And that's going to confuse your audience because they're going to be trying to figure out what it means, and it has no meaning. It might just be there to make something look nice, look pretty, etc. Now, I'm sure you know lots of other serious violations. I could probably list a dozen more, but we don't have time, and I want to get on to some practical tips to show you how to deal with this. So here's the first one we're going to tackle. Clearly, the author of this dashboard likes using the orange gradient. And the first problem with this is there's no color legends. I didn't take them off. They're just not there with this example that I found. So it's really hard to know what's going on. And you've got a lot of other things going on here. You've got green headers with two shades of green. There's a gray background. And you've got the pie chart. That's got more color. And some of them are the same greens and oranges that are in other places. As I already said, the goal of color is to make your message stand out. And the more colors that you use, the brain starts to get really confused. And it's harder for the message to get through. But one thing I'd like you to think about with any of your work is to remove the background color. And so if you're using background color, here's two things. First, just see how it looks with a white background. The other is, if that background color is the same as any other color on your page, you have to change it, again, because there is going to be some potential conflict with how the brain is interpreting that information. Now, I found the color legends and added them back in, and you might look at this pretty quickly and see that there's a big problem. Turns out the same gradients, this orange, are used to represent the measure amount expended on all of the charts. But the ranges are different. So it's impossible to use this for any kind of analysis or decision making because you can't figure out that the dark orange or the light orange mean the same thing, because they don't. And so actually that could lead to some real problems if people think about them that way. And then you've got, again, some of those same orange colors from the gradients in the pie chart. So that just makes it even more confusing. Now, as Randy knows, and maybe some other people who are here today who've heard me before, I'm not really a fan of pie charts, and I'm being nice when I say it that way. So let's tackle that one first and see what we can do to get rid of these kind of conflicting oranges and greens that are all over the place on this particular dashboard. So if we just remove the color and kind of leave the pie, now it doesn't really make sense to use a pie chart that looks like this. So we've got to show this in some different way. And we want to take the size of the slices and figure out what we could do with them. So I always recommend the simplest thing you can do is just turn every slice of that pie chart into a bar, and you're going to make a huge improvement in the readability and the simpleness of this particular type of view. And I want to point out something else that has to do with data literacy, because I mentioned, and we're going to talk about data literacy a few times today. So in the same way that too much color is distracting, too much data can also be overwhelming to the people that are reading your dashboards, who are probably the decision makers. So here, it's showing too much information all the way down to single digits. And I really doubt that seeing that value in this way is going to affect how a decision will be made. So instead, just show it maybe just with a single decimal point, maybe with no decimal points. And that's going to reduce the complexity of your charts in the same way as just taking out those colors. You really want it to be as simple as possible to get the point across to your audience. So now let's tackle all the other pieces of this dashboard now that we dealt with the pie chart. So one part of the dashboard that I find doesn't get a lot of love is actually the title. And the title is really important because it sets up the reader's expectations. And unfortunately, what I see is something like this. It might be a logo at the top and a vague description. In this case, city spending can have a lot of different meanings depending on who the audience is. And so I always like to have a very specific and detailed title because it really tunes the reader in to the message that you're trying to communicate. I like to think of it as a straight line into their brain. So if you study the dashboard and kind of make some assumptions about what it was for, I don't really know. To me, it seemed like it was very important that it's telling a story about spending for a particular year because it repeats that over and over in the titles. So I figured, well, we should figure out a way to take it out of the individual charts and bring it up into the main title of the dashboard. So when I looked at this kind of section here with a little bit of organization, I was able to create something that I think is a lot clearer and simpler. And you'll see how I built in this selector, this filter, into the title. So now it's very clear to the user about what's going on, and they're picking the year, and immediately it draws them in and says, okay, I know exactly what this is about. And then we also don't have to repeat the year in all the other titles, so that's a benefit. Now, one thing you may have heard if you've kind of studied dashboards and visualization for a little bit is that people read these from top to bottom or from left to right. So it's always best to have the most important information in one of those positions. So I'm going to assume that they were following this idea here and that this chart is the most important. So also, if it's the most important, it seems like a good place that we should use the gradient because we're not going to be able to reuse it on all the other charts. We want to apply it in the best possible place to make that information stand out. You'll also see that this information is sorted alphabetically. So if you want to understand the range of the gradient, you've got to scroll a lot to even try to figure that out. And even when you're scrolling, it's hard because it's hard to remember what you saw in one spot as you scroll away. So a good thing to do is to always sort low to high or high to low, unless there's a specific reason that they should have it in this order. And maybe there is. Again, I don't know because I don't really know what message they were trying to get across. And you'll notice one more thing. Because we condensed the information that was above it, we've got a lot of space now, and we actually can use it and we'll probably be able to get rid of having even any of the scrolling. So here's what I came up with for that one. So even just a few simple changes is a big improvement. And of course, seeing all the information at a glance is important because it's going to lead to faster decision-making. And it's also a better user experience because I don't have to scroll up and down and try to remember what I'm looking at. So the next piece is the pie chart. We already talked about that. We're going to put that as a bar chart. I also want to point something out about that you may have noticed. A lot of times it's difficult to control the space, the real estate that a pie chart takes up. And so you'll see here that this bar chart takes up a lot less space. And I am very stingy when it comes to space. I want to give everything the most space that it needs, but no more. Now, on this one, it seems that the author wanted to show some kind of trend, but as bars here, that didn't make a lot of sense. And again, you don't need to use the gradients. So just a simple line chart will get that idea across. And if we take these last two, again, we can't use that gradient. So maybe we can just do something simple like this with some bar charts. And again, you want to try to sort them if you can, high to low or low to high. This last one wasn't sorted alphabetically or by value. I don't really know how it was sorted. I couldn't figure it out. So I just left it like it was because I figured that there must be some reason that they did it that way. Now, I finished this up by doing a couple more things. I simplified the titles because I wanted to get rid of those green, so I just made it white. And then put this nice, simple blue title in. And also, all of the labels across the graph were in bold. And that's another thing to watch out for, because if everything's in bold, then when you really want to use bold to make something stand out, it's not as obvious. So try to stay away from that. And again, it just is in my opinion, is a much cleaner look to not have all that bold. Now, I think this is a lot cleaner. I think it's a more complete view of the data, and it actually is in the same amount of space, which is, of course, even better. Now, if you like this one better, I'd love for you to throw some emoji love out there so we can see how you're feeling about it. But there's one more step I want to take you through here that will actually make, I think, an even more dramatic difference to your work. We already talked about this idea about how the dashboard should have a title that is a single unifying idea. And using that same idea, each visual on your page should also have a single idea that engages the reader. Because, of course, each visual should be part of the whole analysis, which is the main message about what the whole page is supposed to be. And remember, I mentioned before that dashboard authors operate in a way that contradicts this idea, because the goal of a dashboard is to answer questions, yet most authors typically put the information as a statement. So that's why there's a contradiction here. You're trying to answer questions, but you're phrasing everything as a statement. So let's see how we can take care of that. So for example, right in the title here, the first one I wrote says total spending. Let's replace this title with a question, something like, what is the breakdown of spending in that fiscal year? Now, I want you to take a second and see if you feel more engaged. Does it feel like your analytic thinking kicked in right there? It's human nature that when we see a question, your brain wants to answer it, versus a statement, it's like you read it and you kind of move on. You don't really spend any time thinking about it. So that's why it's not really semantics here. I'm not just playing with words. It really makes a difference in how your users engage with it. So let's take a look at how we can change a couple of these other ones. So on the chart where we put the gradient, this first one on the left, it says money spent by department. What about something like this? How much did each department spend? Now, it's not a big difference. It's still the same thing, but it's very specific and clear. And again, you want to make sure to paint a picture in the reader's mind, because it's going to create that level of curiosity because they're trying to answer the question, and it's going to increase their engagement because they're going to want to look into the data more. And I'm sure many of you have been frustrated by the idea of my users aren't engaged with the dashboards. My adoption is low. And these are some of the things that that are small changes that you can use to help address those kinds of problems that you're feeling. So let's just do one more. Down on the line chart, it says money spent by month. What is the monthly spending trend? Again, it's very specific, and it connects the reader to what you want them to think about. So I'm sure a bunch of you probably already have some ideas about some changes you can make on your dashboard. So I've actually written a small ebook that you could download for free that will help you think through how to do this and gives you some examples for some common situations. So you can go to this link, or if you want to just scan the QR code, it'll take you there and you can download it. Hopefully it'll help you, and I'd love to hear from you how you're applying those ideas and seeing if it's making a difference in your work. So let me just take a quick break and see if there's any questions that have come in that you want to throw out to me.
In the dashboard you were just showing, Katie was curious, in a line chart or really anything with a numeric y-axis, do you have a recommendation about starting at 0 or letting the axis auto scale and zoom to the data set?
Great question. And there's some caveats with this one. So let me answer a slightly different way. So first, if you're using bar charts, you have to start at 0. Otherwise, the result will look very misleading. And if you want to get more details on that, shoot me a note, or I'm sure you could just Google it and you'll see people talking about the reason why it hurts your analysis. With line charts, you could go either way. It really depends what you want to do. So in this case, I chose to just get rid of the 0 axis, which is probably what prompted your question. So I really wanted to be able to see a little bit more clearly what the trend line was. And that happens a lot because if you put the 0 in, and let's say all your numbers are really high, it's going to end up compressing everything. And if, let's say, you want to show the idea that maybe all the values are very close, then you can leave it that way. But if there is some movement between them that's important to understand, even though the values might be close, you probably want to do something like this to expand it. So it kind of depends on what message you want to get across, and also what the point of the data is at all, right? Maybe you don't need to see that there's small variations. That's not relevant. So you certainly don't want to spend time highlighting it, because then you'll draw attention to something that's really not important to the conversation. So it's not a hard and fast rule. You really have to think through why you're showing it in a particular way. So I hope that answers your question.
That's good. You want to go a couple more?
Sure.
Joshua asks about what's the best way to represent a good bad color scheme if you're designing with red green color blindness, or I'll throw in accessibility in mind. And I don't know that you, in this dashboard, I don't know if you have good and bad.
I don't on this particular one, but let me take a crack at answering the question. So yeah, it's a really good question, because the whole red, yellow, green thing is something that I'm on on the campaign trail, if you will, to evangelize getting rid of using it for the most part. And it's so ingrained in how we do our work. I freely admit that early on in my career doing this kind of work, I used it too. Why? Because I didn't know any better. It's what was there, right? I was using Excel. It had red, yellow, green, or red and green. And I think the moment that made me realize how bad it was, outside of things like color vision deficiency, dealing with that, was on one of the people that I was working with told me to make the green more green and the red less red. And my reaction was probably like one of those cartoons where your eyes pop out of your head and your jaw hits the floor. I was like, why in the world would I do that? Now I knew why. I just wanted them to say it. And I said, I'm not doing that. So I knew that we had to deal with that in some different ways. But to answer your question, again, there's a lot of options. One thing is, if you work with financial numbers, if you're working with profit, something like that, where there's a positive and a negative, you can use something like red and black, because they actually have a meaning tied to them in finance, in the red and in the black. So that works well. You can use something like a red and a blue, a red and an orange is good, or you can use two totally different colors. I mean, I've even used something like a gold and a purple, really just to distinguish the two ends so that people clearly understand that there's a spectrum and it's not just going from low to high, but it goes from negative to positive. You have to be careful if you use something like a gradient that just goes from, say, like a light color to a dark color, because your brain automatically assumes that the lowest color is going to be, or the lightest color is going to be the lowest number. And it might not just be apparent to people that it's a negative. They might still assume it's a positive. So you have to be careful with situations like that.
So
Let's do
Barbara
one more, and then I'll keep going.
Barbara posted in the chat a link to Adobe's new color contrast analyzer. It's got some accessibility tools too. So,
Great,
and that's
thank
one
you.
of many tools, or a bunch of color accessibility tools to help you design your palette to be more accessible. I got two questions. I'm going to put them together because they're all about you using questions in your dashboard as your headers or your titles. One is, how can we keep the chart titles short and concise without losing the story we are trying to convey? And then the other one is, might the questions come off as too casual or unprofessional depending on the context?
Ooh, the second one, that's interesting. Let me let that sit in my head for a second. So how to make them short and sweet? Well, that can be tough, but I'll give you one tool that you could actually try. There's a free website called WordTune, WORDTUNE.com, and you can put a phrase in, and it will give you a bunch of options on how you can rephrase something. And it is amazing and a little bit frightening at the same time, because it's using artificial intelligence to do it. It's not like you have to do it for a particular type of industry. It's really good. So that's one of the first things I always try if I just can't come up with something. I just throw it in there and then read through the options, and sometimes I have to combine a few of its answers. It doesn't always nail it, but it's definitely something good to break you out of your own head and your kind of own limited thinking from that perspective. In terms of seeming too casual, I don't know. Does a question like that seem more casual than just putting money spent or something like that? That to me seems quite casual. I'm going to have to think about that one a little bit more. Maybe we could have a conversation about that. Maybe you could give me some specific, or maybe you can throw in a specific example that you have in mind, maybe something you're thinking about.
Let me throw in my own thought, which is, what if you did money spent or department spend question mark, or money spent question mark, and shorten it to a sentence snippet? Yours is much more conversational. Any thoughts between, it's still a question, but does it need to be a full question as if you're talking to somebody?
That's how I've been doing it for a while. It seems to work well. I don't know, money spent question mark. It's almost like you don't know. I don't know. That one doesn't. That one's not sitting.
Right. Well, whatever the short is, like highest department spend question mark, or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately the way that you can just figure that out is to test it, right? So to me, the point is to phrase it as a question. The length or the structure of the question. So maybe in your organization, you could show it both ways and see how people react to it. And so you don't have to be arbitrary about it. You can see what works. And if just a short snippet works fine, go with that. I don't think there's really a right or wrong answer to it. I think it's just what seems to work best with your audience. And it could be different depending on who the audience is. Maybe the executives just want the snippet, and maybe maybe your colleagues want the whole phrase. Who knows, right? So it might not be a one size fits all answer either for that, because all audiences are different.
Right.
So yeah.
All right, we got a couple more, but I'm going to leave them. We're going to hold on to those so you can continue.
Right, we've already done that. All right, so let's get to our next one here. So this is some survey data. And on this one, you probably can see that they're using the same colors to represent 4 completely different sets of information. So as I've mentioned before, that's going to cause the reader's brain to start trying to make those connections as, oh, these are the same colors. So there must be some relationship. And in fact, there's no relationship. So you're creating more strain, and you're also creating confusion for no reason. So with colors like this, you really have to be purposeful and choose what you want to emphasize and how also those colors are going to work with others in the design. Because a lot of times you might be creating each of these kind of visuals on their own. And then you say, oh, I've got 4 charts. Now let me throw them together on a dashboard. And all of a sudden you realize that you've been adding color, but maybe your software is adding the same color palette every time, and now you're in a bind and you're kind of rework everything. And so don't just, because your software just uses certain colors when you ask it to do it, don't just take that as the end all and think that that's going to work for you. Now, the other thing that I took away from this one is that maybe the author was trying to be kind of cool. I saw some what I would consider more advanced type of charts with the tree map and this bubble chart. Those aren't as common, and especially if your audience isn't familiar with them, that can be a huge distraction. And the goal is not to look cool. The goal is to be effective at communicating your message. So let's start with the pie chart, and you can guess where this one's going to go. We've already tackled that. So a simple pie chart, bar chart using these light grays. We don't need necessarily to call anything out here. Now, this bar chart I looked at, and I felt that these 2 blues were almost acting like a gradient, a light blue and a dark blue. But we know that gradients can only be used for values or measures, something like that. And upstream and downstream are really more descriptions of something. So here it's going to be better to use unique colors. So I thought something like this. I chose red and blue. I wanted to keep one of the blues, and I wanted something quite different, be the red. Not that it's bad. We could have chosen anything. This bubble chart is actually very similar to a pie chart, because instead of using size for slices of the pie, you're just using size on these bubbles. So I just said, let's just make that one a bar chart too. Keep it simple. We don't need to do anything special to it. The part that amazed me the most about this was the tree map has geographic information. And so it just seemed like maybe that one should just be a map, a real map. And when you start to work with visualization and understand the language of visualization, and there is a language to it, it's very straightforward to create a visual like this right out of the gate. It doesn't really require lots of back and forth. You're going to kind of have a feel for what to do. Just like when you're writing, you have a sense of how you want to write. With words, you're going to be the same way when it comes to visuals. Now, again, I also think this is a much simpler version. And here, we're really using color to highlight the data. So again, when we talk about color, really saying 2 things. So in this case, we've got a gradient. And so that's different shades. And you can see we're going from this green to this kind of burnt orange to show the exact, ends of the spectrum rather than going from a light to dark. And then we've got these unique single colors, which are really meant to show each element of a dimension or description of that information. And you want to use this very sparingly. And the idea, again, is to make the information stand out. So, and you can see that we've used grays here for information that's not meant to stand out. Obviously it's important, but there's nothing in particular that you want to call out to it. So you don't need to do any extra treatment to that. And like I mentioned in the beginning, when they were kind of trying to make this cool, when you try to start making your page look pretty, that's really when the trouble begins. You really have to stay away from that idea, because it's really going to drag you down into a place that you're going to either not get a visual that gets your ideas across, and you're not going to be able to do the kind of analysis you want. Now, one thing you might have picked up on that original dashboard, it actually did not have a title. Now, it's possible that that could have been part of a presentation and everybody knew the context of it, so it didn't need a title. But if that page was sent around separately, it could potentially create a lot of uncertainty if it wasn't specific to what the point of it was. So I just threw a title like this in. Again, try to be very specific and clear. When someone reads that, they're going to know exactly what the rest of this page is about. But let's tackle a couple of these other titles, because again, you can see these are all kind of very generic statements on each of the charts. So instead of respondents by revenue, let's go with what is the revenue distribution. And on the map, how about where are executives located? Sounds a lot better. Again, you want to try to keep it specific and simple as you can. So just to recap, we covered 3 ideas today, and I really hope that you've already seen something that you can take away and put into action. And I wouldn't really worry about getting it perfect. Don't try to do, everything necessarily all at once. You can make these changes one at a time, introduce them to your teams and to your customers, like I mentioned before, trying it out and seeing what resonates with them. So also, when you want to run a test, you don't want to change too many variables at the same time, kind of one thing and then try another thing. And that's what's great about our modern software is you can make these changes really fast. So it doesn't take a lot of labor. You can sometimes just do them in real time if you're in a meeting, if it allows for it. So the 3 things we talked about, you want to help your reader's brain tune in to your visuals, using color to focus attention to something important, not just have it there for the sake of having color. And this idea that questions create engagement and draw people into thinking about what it means and really trying to understand the message in a stronger way. So if there's, hopefully we get to a couple of more questions, a few things and ways you can get a hold of me. If you happen to have access to Pluralsight, I have a briefing out there. That's the title of it, Data Strategy Equals Business Strategy. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I've got some videos up on the YouTube channel with lots of folks from the industry. And of course, you can get me on things like Twitter or just shoot me an email and I will do my best to get back to you. So Randy, we have any more questions out there we can start to try to tackle?
We do.
Okay, let's do it.
And these are all over the place, so there's no particular grouping. So let me start with the one.
Give me an easy one first.
From Edward. Since you were just talking about the redesign that you did on that dashboard there, his question is, what if you get pushback and someone says it looks boring or all the charts look the same?
That'll never happen. Yeah. So I'll give you kind of a short answer because I have a whole workshop where we go through these kinds of things. But the way I would recommend you respond to that is asking them a question. And the question would go something like this. Randy, what would you change it? What would you change it to, and how would that help you understand it better? They say it's boring. When you say boring, what do you mean? So don't try to interpret what they mean. Ask a question back to them and let them tell you what they're thinking about. Because you might just answer it in a way that doesn't even tie to what they were trying to get to. And that way you can have more of a conversation. The one thing I definitely recommend is don't try to defend it. Like, don't say, well, I read a blog post and it said that the best way to do it is this way, right? Or I listened to a webinar by this guy, Lee Feinberg, and he said, never use pie charts, always use bar charts, right? Don't defend it. because that won't go over well. But just try to have a conversation about it and get some more understanding from them about why they're making those comments. Because maybe you'll come up with a third idea. Their idea isn't necessarily good. Maybe yours isn't the best, and maybe together you'll come up with something.
All right. So since you just brought it up again, let's get into it. What's your beef with pie charts?
How much time do we have? I wrote a 10-part blog series a few years ago about pie charts because that's how much I don't like them. But I didn't just write a blog. I didn't write the whole blog post ranting and raving about them. I actually gave people ideas about what they could use instead. The real reason is, I think, what I already mentioned. One, I think they take up a lot of space and they're hard to control in most software. There's a lot of blank area around it, and I'm really stingy with the space I use. And I also just think bar charts get the point across faster. One, because you have more control on the sorting. And pie charts require to use color. And if you want to use color for something else on that same page, you may not be able to. So to me, it's almost like a throwaway. You're putting it there, and now you're taking away an opportunity to use it in potentially a better way. Plus, then you need labels and just a lot of other stuff that I think make them not that useful. Even if you're down to 2, I think even 2, you don't 2 slices, you don't need it.
Let me ask you this. This is for me.
Yeah.
Your replacement redesign was to replace the pie chart with a clustered bar chart.
Clustered bar
How?
chart.
Yeah. So the comparison bar chart. How do you address the visual need to show that those values all add up to a grand total, that they're all parts of a whole 100%?
Yeah. So, well, in this particular case, it wasn't even showing 100%, right? They were just dollar values. So that's different. If you're showing, so instead of, again, showing it, let's say they were bars, and you wanted to say that they added up to 100%. A lot of times there's a problem with that if you just say in the software, throw on a total, because then the total bar will be 100, and then it'll kind of force the other ones to be a lot smaller. So that could be a problem visually and kind of disjointed. If you really think it's a problem, you could put a little footnote underneath it, just say values add up to 100%. I wouldn't make it a big font or anything. I would just make sure it was there. Or you could just put 100% at the bottom of it without a bar, just to say, to show that it's 100%, something like that. So I think there's a couple different ways to tackle that. I also think, depending on who the audience is, if it's something that they would see pretty often, they're probably going to be trained, I'll say trained in quotes, to know that it's 100%, and it won't be as much of an issue. So you also have to take the context into account in terms of who's reading it and under what circumstances they'll be using it.
Okay. Let's go back to the questions and see if we can get through a couple of these. Hansa asks, what are your thoughts about adding borders to these visualizations? So framing each category or section in the dashboard.
Yeah, that's a great question. I see that a lot. My goal is to not have to use any kind of border, because I like to have the least amount of anything out there. And so to me, borders are extra. So I really strive to get away from it. Now, how do I do that? One way is you could put maybe a little border around the title. I wouldn't necessarily, you could color the title in, maybe a light color instead of a border, and that can act as a separator. I also try to design the charts in a way that they could also kind of act enough as separators among themselves, or how they're positioned also, and how much space they take up. So you could certainly do a border. I'm not against like a light border, so it's just enough to see that it's there, but not a black border of multi-point thickness kind of thing. You just want it to be subtle enough to act as a separator. Is not horrible, but I always try to get away from it.
All right. So Cameron asks, can you talk a bit about the role of the about how the role of the dashboard would inform your redesign? And it could be either one of the ones you showed. And how to prioritize when your dashboard may have multiple types of readers in the audience. So, for example, in the City Insights dashboard, what might change if you're presenting the dashboard to government officials versus the public and citizens?
Yes. Tell me, what was the first part again? I started concentrating on the second one because I know what I want to say.
Just the role the dashboard plays and how that informs your design.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the most critical thing to know ultimately is why are you even doing it? Right? If there's no clear purpose behind why it should even exist, it's going to be real hard to make something that works well. So I have this phrase, intent before content. So I always have to know not only what is the point of the dashboard, but even for each chart, right? And when I'm doing work with any kind of design, I always think of not take the data, make a chart, make a title. It's what's the title? Because the title it determines what the intent is. And until I know that, I can't decide what is the best type of chart to get that message across. A lot of people do it in reverse, right? They connect the data, they make the charts, they make the titles, then they make multiple charts and they put them all together on a dashboard and then they put a title on the dashboard. Completely opposite of how I get people to do it. So you definitely have to have that intent. In terms of the audience, you may not like my answer. The answer is you do a dashboard, and I'm calling them dashboards here, but I really like to call them analytic stories. But you have to do one for each audience because, again, they may have different purposes and goals behind why they want to see it. Even though it's the exact same data, they may be trying to see something different or understand something different or make a different type of decision. So you may have to change every single chart on there. And that's why I really have a trouble when people make, the work you see a lot today is someone makes a dashboard and it has 10 selectors on it. You've got all these filters because, I want anybody to come in and be able to choose what they want. And really what you've done, you're trying to make it like one size fits all. And I always kind of think it's like one size fits none because how can you really find anything out when you built it that way? It's like an infinite number of combinations of filters to go through to see anything of potential importance. My feeling about those, it's becoming more like a fancy-ish UI into the database.
Topic shift.
Okay.
So a question from Tom, how do you balance your color selections when there are only so many colors available within a design system? Right. So often design system colors are chosen specifically to avoid accessibility issues and maintain brand consistency. I will add, like sometimes there's even a brand style guide, right? Or a data visualization style guide. So how do you address choosing colors when you're given, here are the colors you're going to use?
Right. Well, you hit on one point in there, which is the brand style guide. Okay. So I'll just give you my interpretation of what I took that as. So a brand style guide is something that someone in the communications department of the company made in terms of how you should use the logo colors. There's multiple shades of things like that. Maybe they have to be something used on the website or in print material. There's nothing to do with data visualization. That's the worst thing. And people do it all the time. And again, why do they do it? Because they just use it because they're like, I'm going to use my company's colors. Now, sometimes you get lucky and those are good colors for visualizations, but a lot of times they're not. And because those colors were chosen for very different reasons. I had a client and their corporate color was red. That was their main corporate color. So what did they do all their visualizations in? everything was red. The good was red. The bad was red. Everything was red because that's what they thought they should do. So Randy, you mentioned something which I don't see very often, which is a visualization guide.
It's pretty rare.
Which very rare, but it's definitely something that people should be doing, and they can do it with the communications department or the marketing department or whoever could add value into that, because they will have some really good skills. But everybody has to come to terms with their two totally different things for two very different reasons. So that's part of the answering part of your question. In terms of how do you choose, I think that goes back to the idea of thinking about, number one, where do you really need to emphasize in your work? And you have to try to maintain some consistency too, right? Because as you go from, say, page to page, you don't want to start shifting the meanings of those colors either necessarily. So you really have to carry them through. You don't want to change, blue is sales on one page, and on the next page it's, quantity. Because people are going to be thinking, oh, well, it's sales, and they might not even, it doesn't matter if you have labels, right? A lot of times people don't read the legends or the labels, they just look at it and their brain just kicks in and they make an assumption. And because your brain's working much faster in kind of this immediate reaction mode before it really starts necessarily thinking about it analytically. So you have to be real careful with that. And what may happen is you may lay everything out, you might choose some colors, and you may find out you have to rework it as you go through it. It might work on, say, the first page you build, and then you build the next one. You're like, wow, I really need to use it in a different way. So you have to be kind of prepared to go back. It's kind of like when you write a paper, you edit it. You write and you write and you write, and then you go back and you have an editor and you say, oh, I'm going to change this. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't tie to what I say later on. It's kind of the same thing when you're doing it visually. You can't just keep moving forward. You have to consider the whole story that you're building and presenting.
I'll add that when I talk about that, you want your color meanings to be consistent, whether you're doing a presentation or a report or an infographic, throughout whatever your format is in your dashboard, the color meaning should be consistent.
Absolutely.
Okay. Mimi asks, thoughts on using more complex data visualizations such as stack bar charts, and I would add some of the more advanced ones like tree maps and bubble clusters and stuff like that. Or is that too much for a dashboard?
I don't think it's ever too much. I think I'm not against those. I hope it didn't sound like that. What I'm always concerned with is the audience. It's not whether I understand it, it's whether the reader understands it. And so one thing is, like one of the other questions was about know your audience. And so you have to ask them or test it and show it to them. And I could show it to somebody and they might look at it and say, what do you think? Does it reflect this? Do you and if they go, I don't even know what that thing is. It's like, all right, I know that's bad. I don't want to use a tree map because maybe they've never seen it before. But then I might try to explain it to them and see how they feel about it. Just because they're confused, a lot of times it's going to be because they've never seen it, or they've seen it, but no one ever told them how to interpret it. And so you tend to shy away from that, which is a shame because those can be very powerful. If it suits the need, you should definitely be able to use it if it makes sense. So part of what I talk a lot about with clients is that even if you follow all the best practices that are out there and you design a dashboard and people look at it and it's got all the things we talked about today and more, it doesn't mean it's going to necessarily work for your audience. You always have to test it. You may have heard of things like, and I'm not saying you should go this far, but you may have heard of things like, well, when people design websites, there's usability testing. They bring people into a room, or maybe they're remote and they show them a website and they have eye trackers and they track all their mouse clicks and things like that. You don't necessarily have to go that far, but they don't just say, I'm going to design it and throw it out there. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes that a lot of people wouldn't know is there. And so we should be doing similar things like that in our work, not just making it saying, well, I'm not going to use a stacked bar chart because of this. Although I'm not a fan of stacked bar charts either. That could be another discussion. But
hey.
but but that's really what I think you should do. I think you should try it out with people and see how they react. And that's really, in the end, the best way to do it. Don't second guess anybody. Just see.
All right, a couple quick questions. Tom asked if you go to the I/O festival, and I would expand that to be, do you attend any of the visualization conferences that happen throughout the year?
The only conference that I attend in person usually is the Tableau conference because I'm a Tableau partner. But I do try to attend a lot of different things that are online, whether it's webinars that I think are interesting, try to read a lot of blog posts, of course, to see what people's opinions are. And a lot of stuff is, frankly, become free now. When, over the last couple of years, a lot of conferences might have a paid version, but then they open up a lot of content for free. So I don't know that I'll be ever necessarily going to. I've gone to Tapestry before, but that's kind of like more invite.
That's
only.
A great one.
That was good. Brings a lot of thought leaders together. And there's a few others I can't recall off the top of my head that I've gone to.
Okay, so Mala asks, is there a standard dashboard size? Do you try to fit within the standard size when you design a dashboard?
Yeah, age-old question. There might be a standard size for your organization or for your audience, right? If your audience is the CEO and they only look at their phone, that's your standard size for the CEO. If you have, say, a lot of organizations all have the same laptop, maybe you want to try to design for that laptop to be optimal. It's a real tough one. I find in software when it has something like an automatic setting, I try to stay away from that. I personally, if the client doesn't have something particular, I might try to stick with even 1,000 by 800 because I've also found that works on tablets really well. I also sometimes artificially constrain myself. So even if I know that something might have more space available, I might try to squeeze it down. When I say squeeze it down, I don't mean just make things smaller. I mean work at the design so that it can fit very well in that space. Because a lot of times, frankly, if you're like, oh, I just get a lot of space, you get lazy. Because you're like, oh, it fits. You don't really push yourself to do the best job that you could. So that's something I definitely recommend is try to give yourself less space to work with and see how it goes.
Related, and you touched on this on your first example a little bit, but what's your thought about dashboards that need a scroll bar?
Yeah, it's tough because, well, there could be a scroll bar in a couple of places. So within a chart, it could have a scroll, right? And then your dashboard might be bigger than kind of the screen space and need to scroll. I think both of those can be really dangerous. The problem is mostly, we don't have great memories, most of us. And so if you're looking at something, say on one section of the dashboard, and then you have to scroll, and that goes away, and you look at the other section, the first part starts to go out of your brain, and so you're in this constant, tug of war with trying to recall what's there, right? And so that's just kind of the problem with scrolling the whole page. Horizontal scrolling, you definitely cannot have that anywhere. That's even worse than vertical scrolling. The vertical scrolling within a particular chart, kind of similar problem. One is you don't get the full view of the information. It's really hard to know that, regardless of what kind of chart it is, because it's hard if it's not sorted, especially to know what the range of the information is. And that's why sorting is really important, unless there's a very specific reason to know to fix the order of things, alphabetically or most recently launched campaigns or newest products, something like that, where you really need it that way, then you're kind of stuck. But again, it's kind of like the same thing with the size of the dashboard issue. Is if it's scrolling, try to figure out a way to not make it scroll. I know I'm just kind of saying it like it's easy.
Yep.
But
try to eliminate
our job
bars.
as the designer, as the creator, the author, we have to do the hard work to make it easy for all the people that are our readers. If you have tens or hundreds of readers, think about the impact on them and on the company in terms of the energy, time that it takes those people to do all that extra work versus if we figure it out for them and take that burden away.
Okay. We got time for just a couple more.
Okay.
Angelica asks, and I know this one, I like this one because I've talked about this one too, but are there any best practices on where to add labels on the horizontal bar charts, on the inside of the bars or on the outside? She says, I sometimes wonder if adding the labels next to the bars visually extends the bars and makes it harder to compare the bar lengths.
I think the most standard way that it's been done is the way it's generally always been done, which is having the numbers at the end. I think that's what people are most familiar with because they kind of look at the size. They kind of follow the bar and then they can kind of see the number there. I've seen them on the insides of the right of the end of the bar. If it's all all positive or all negative values, I've seen it positioned next to the axis. I'm not in love with that. I think if you want to show the number there, I would almost break it out and just have it as a column of numbers next to it, not inside the bar. I think even though it takes up a little more space, I kind of prefer it that way. The one thing I will mention is to try to not have the actual axis with the numbers on it. So if the bars are labeled or there's numbers somewhere, you don't need the axis with the numbers too. It's redundant and then it takes up extra space. And you've already heard me say many times, I'm very stingy with my space.
I would say in my design, I'll just add that I do think the labels blur the ends of the bars a little bit. They look a little bit longer. So I always try to put the labels inside the bars if possible. The challenge is when you have small bars, right? So if your range goes from a nice long bar where you've got room for a label down to some really small bars that have nothing, and you have to put the labels on the outside, that's where it becomes challenging. And if you're designing a dashboard, you don't know what data is coming next month, or whatever, whenever the dashboard updates, it becomes tough because it's got to be able to handle both.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've seen that happen a lot.
I'm going to do one more. There are a couple here, and I'll ask how people can get a hold of you if they have additional questions at the end. But I want to do one last question here from Jessica, who says she's not a data person. She works for a financial institution, and they have asked me to help organize their Tableau landing page. Any recommendations or places she might start just trying to figure out Tableau landing pages?
Wow. So yeah, actually, this is great. The last and only question about Tableau, and I said I wasn't going to talk about.
Yeah, we kept it away from tool specific.
Yeah, so maybe it's appropriate. Well, first, Google's your friend. You'll see lots of examples on there. There's tons of stuff out there for that. This isn't a product pitch, but I just happened to be on a webinar today, so it's really fresh in my mind. There's a company called Interworks, and they actually have a product that helps you create landing pages like that. It's called Curator. I'm pretty sure there's some other companies that have something similar, but literally I just saw it like 5 hours ago. So you can kind of go both ways. You can grow your own. There's definitely ways to do that, and there's plenty of examples. Or there might be some things that you could purchase to help with that. But of course, that's going to cost you money, and I don't know what your situation is.
What your situation is.
So great question.
Lee.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We absolutely appreciate you volunteering your time and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. Your screen is still sharing with all your contact info. Anywhere in particular you would like people, if they have a question, to specifically reach out to you? Are you on LinkedIn more than Twitter, say, for example, or something like that?
Yeah, Twitter. Don't ask me a question on Twitter. Probably won't respond there. I'll respond if you send me an email. I'll respond if you send me something on LinkedIn. That's where I spend more of my time.
Okay. Well, Lee, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
We appreciate your
my
time.
pleasure. Yeah,
And everybody attending, thank you very much. We are going to work on making the recording of this available in the next few days. So bear with me. I'll get that put together so Lee can take a look at it.
awesome.
And other than that, stay tuned to your local meetup groups until the next event gets announced. So Lee, thank you very much.
Yeah, Randy, it was great. Appreciate it.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. So good night, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time.
Take care.